All right, everybody, buckle up because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride.
Mm.
We're talking presidential elections, international intrigue, even whispers of treason.
Yeah, we're diving headfirst into a political thriller, one that might seem ripped from the headlines, even though it all went down back in 1980.
And to guide us through this maze, we're digging into Den of Spies, a new book by journalist Craig Unger.
He spent decades, mind you, piecing together this puzzle, a puzzle a lot of folks dismissed, conspiracy theory, that kind of thing. But Unger argues it was a deliberate plot to, get this, delay the release of the American hostages held in Iran.
Talk about an October surprise,
Yeah.
right? And we're going to break it all down, looking at excerpts from a Guardian article that really digs into Unger's claims.
Because you might be thinking, 1980, what's that got to do with me? But trust me, the parallels to what we see today, election interference, shadowy dealings, it's all there. Even folks like Hillary Clinton are sounding the alarm about this kind of stuff.
Right, so let's rewind the clock back to 1980. America's in a tough spot. The hostage crisis is just dragging on, and you've got Jimmy Carter fighting tooth and nail to get reelected.
And then you've got Ronald Reagan's campaign manager, this guy, William Casey.
Okay, now Unger, he describes Casey as this really fascinating character. Like, imagine a mix between James Bond and Mr. Magoo.
Yeah, kind of bumbling on the surface, but with this, like, razor-sharp mind underneath. Unger argues this guy, Casey, he was at the heart of this whole thing.
Orchestrating this audacious scheme to, like you said, keep those hostages stuck in Iran, make sure Carter didn't get any kind of boost from a last-minute release.
Meetings in Madrid, arms, deals with Israel, Iranian arms dealers using fake names. It's like something straight out of Hollywood.
That does sound kind of far-fetched when you lay it all out like that, right?
Right, but that's the thing, Unger. He doesn't just spin a yarn. He's got years of research to back this up. I'm talking government documents, interviews with ex-intelligence officers.
He even uncovered this treasure trove of files, right, from another journalist, a guy who disappeared while he was investigating this very story.
Yeah, like something straight out of a spy novel.
Seriously. And then there's this one piece of evidence that Unger keeps coming back to, an attendance ledger from, of all places, a conference at the Imperial War Museum in London.
What's the heck got to do with anything?
Well, this ledger, it seems to put Casey in multiple places at the same time. Like, physically impossible.
Whoa, suggesting what, like he had, what, a body double or something?
It's Unger's theory that, yeah, this was a deliberate attempt by Casey to cover his tracks, make sure nobody could definitively place him at these secret meetings.
So we've got potential election interference, secret meetings, possible cover-ups, and this is where Unger's investigation takes, well, an even darker turn.
Because he sees this whole alleged 1980 plot not as an isolated incident, but as a sort of like a precursor to a much bigger scandal, Iran-Contra.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, was this massive, and I mean massive, scandal that engulfed the Reagan administration a few years later.
And Unger's suggesting that this wasn't just a one-time thing, that there was this pattern of, let's say, flexible morals when it came to foreign policy.
Right, like this willingness to operate in the shadows, maybe even compromise American ideals, all in the name of, national security or whatever.
So it makes you wonder, if Unger's right, just how far would people go to gain power and hold on to it? And what does that say about the system we have?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. And it all circles back to why? Why would Casey, even if he was this mastermind, risk everything on such a crazy plan?
To really get inside Casey's head, we got to rewind even further. Think back to the Cold War. Like, this wasn't just some political rivalry. It was like good versus evil, democracy versus communism, the fate of the world hanging in the balance kind of stuff.
So for a guy like Casey, the stakes were, well, incredibly high.
Exactly. And Unger argues that Casey's worldview, it was shaped by some pretty intense experiences. World War II, his time in the OSS, which was like the early version of the CIA, dealing with, spies and sabotage and all that.
So he's seeing the world in these black and white terms, us versus them.
Exactly. Unger's point is that Casey believed that sometimes you got to bend the rules, get your hands dirty to protect what you believe in.
Even if that means, what, potentially undermining the very system you're trying to defend.
Yeah, that's the tough pill to swallow here. Unger's not saying it's right, but he's saying that's how Casey saw it. Like, in Casey's mind, a Carter victory wasn't just losing an election, it was a blow to America itself.
Because, from Casey's perspective, Carter was soft on communism.
You got it. Unger portrays Casey as convinced that Carter's foreign policy was like an open invitation for the Soviets to flex their muscles.
So in Casey's mind, this wasn't about politics. It was about, what, saving America from a very real threat.
Right, and that's a dangerous line of thinking, right? Because once you start justifying those kinds of actions, where do you draw the line?
Sobering stuff. And it makes you wonder, are there safeguards in place now to prevent this kind of thing from happening again? Like, how do we make sure that people in power, no matter how well-intentioned they think they are, don't go too far?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Unger, he doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he does argue that, like, step one is being aware that this kind of stuff can happen. Like, we got to be critical thinkers, especially with the news and information these days.
And he talks a lot about the importance of investigative journalism.
Hmm.
Reporters willing to dig deep, ask tough questions, even when it ruffles feathers.
Absolutely. And it's not easy, right? I mean, Unger himself, he faced a ton of pushback with this book, people calling him a conspiracy theorist, threatening lawsuits, the whole 9 yards.
Which, in a way, kind of proves his point. Like, if there wasn't something to hide, why all the fuss?
Right. Unger really seems to believe that there were powerful people who did not want this story told. So yeah, a free press, journalists willing to dig for the truth, it's more important now than ever.
Absolutely. So we've got this alleged plot in 1980, and then a few years later, the Iran-Contra affair explodes. Help us connect those dots. What's the link between these two events?
So Iran-Contra, right? It was basically this whole thing where senior officials in the Reagan administration, they're secretly selling arms to Iran, which sounds kind of crazy because we had this whole embargo against them.
Right, you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, big no-no. And then it gets even shadier. The money they made from those arms sales, they funneled it right back to the Contras.
And just as a reminder, the Contras, they were these rebels fighting against the socialist government down in Nicaragua.
Right, so you've got this whole web of secret deals, backroom handshakes, and it's all happening under the radar. And Unger, he sees some serious parallels between this and the whole October surprise situation.
Both involve Iran, sure. But what else links them together, in Unger's view?
Well, he points to the players involved, right? You start digging around in both stories, and you see some of the same names popping up. Like guys who were allegedly involved in those 1980 meetings, they're also mixed up in Iran-Contra.
So it's like this network, this shadowy group of guys operating behind the scenes.
That's exactly how Unger sees it. And it gets to this really unsettling idea, this idea that maybe there's this whole other level of foreign policy happening, stuff that we, the public, were totally in the dark about.
Decisions being made, actions being taken, all without any real oversight or accountability.
Exactly. And if Unger's right, it means this wasn't just a one-off, right? It suggests a pattern of behavior, a willingness to, let's just say, bend the rules, maybe even break them, to achieve certain goals.
And that's a pretty scary thought, right?
Yeah.
Because where does it stop? If they were willing to do it then, what's to stop it from happening again?
Right. And that's the question Unger really wants us to wrestle with. He doesn't have all the answers, but he's shining a light on this corner of history, these events, and saying, hey, take a closer look because this stuff matters.
It's a call to action, isn't it? To be more informed, more engaged, to really think critically about the information we're being fed.
Absolutely. And to support, real investigative journalism. Because without reporters willing to dig deep and ask tough questions, who knows what kind of stuff would stay hidden?
That's the thing about this whole story. It's like peeling back layers of an onion, and every layer just gets more and more unsettling. But it's also a story that needs to be told, right? Because we can't learn from history if we don't know what actually happened.
100%. And like you said, it's not just about the past, is it? It's about the present, about making sure we don't repeat those same mistakes.
So for anyone listening who's, maybe a little bit spooked out right now, what can we do? Like, how do we make sure our democracy is strong, that we're not just pawns in some shadowy game?
Well, like we were saying, stay informed, stay engaged. Don't just accept things at face value. Ask questions. Demand transparency from our leaders.
And don't be afraid to, raise a little hell if you think something's not right.
Exactly. The power ultimately rests with the people, right? But only if we're willing to use it.
Couldn't have said better myself. Well, folks, we've covered a lot of ground today. From Cold War anxieties to presidential campaigns, from backroom deals to the importance of a free press.
It's a lot to digest, but if you're hungry for more, and trust me you will be, check out Craig Unger's book, Den of Spies. It's a wild ride, and it might just change the way you see the world.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the possibilities. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.